But today we're going to dive deep, really deep into some fascinating stuff. We've got these excerpts, right, from PDF, and it's got this whole narrative about an army, a prophesied army coming from this place with a seriously long history.
Yeah, a land steeped in like prophetic weight,
Exactly. And we're going to try to unpack that, right? Like, how does this army from Khorasan, how are they connected to this idea of justice? And how does all of that connect to what we're seeing in the world today?
Because it does. According to this text, it's like it's tying these ancient ideas to our present moment. It's really interesting.
Yeah, and we're not just going to summarize, right? We're going to try to bring you, it's like the historical context. We're going to talk about like how different people interpret these prophecies, and hopefully we can leave you with some things to think about, in relation to your own life. So first off, this place, Khorasan, it's more than just a place, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like in this text, it's presented as this like foundational place in Islamic history.
It's hugely significant.
Yeah, like almost mythical, a source of knowledge, spirituality. It's where Sufis and scholars like came from.
It's presented as the origin point for movements of truth. Like real change makers came from this place.
It wasn't just where stuff happened. It was like the starting point.
Exactly. And you got to remember, right, Khorasan, geographically, it was vast. We're talking parts of Persia, Central Asia. This region, I mean, it shaped Islamic civilization for centuries. Philosophers, scientists, poets, key figures in Islamic spirituality.
They all came from Khorasan.
Right. So when you talk about an army coming from there, it's not just a geographical detail. It carries all this historical weight.
And that's where the prophecy comes in. This prophecy from the Ahadith, from the sayings and traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. It talks about this army, right, with black banners, rising up from Khorasan.
And their purpose is really clearly defined. It's about justice. It's about fighting oppression. It's about being a force of light in a dark world.
And the text actually, it actually includes a hadith. It's attributed to Sunan Ibn Majah, 4084. And it says, well, it's in Arabic, of course.
Of course, yeah.
Zelikin, Chan, Isi Chan, Yo, Niao, Yese. The Anakama he sent up, and he takes to again get all that smell.
So that translates to, when you see black banners coming from the direction of Khorasan, join them, and this is important, even if you have to crawl over ice, for among them is the Khalifa of Allah.
Wow. Powerful imagery.
Yeah, and there's this parenthetical note which seems to be connecting this prophecy to the Mahdi, a key figure in Islamic eschatology. He's the guided one who's, expected to appear at the end of times to establish justice.
It's interesting, though. The text actually points out that this particular narration is considered a weak narration.
Yeah, and that's a crucial point.
What does that even mean? Like weak?
So in Islamic scholarship, there's a whole science dedicated to evaluating the authenticity of a hadith. It's pretty complex, but basically weak narration means that the chain of narrators or the context of the hadith, there's something that makes its reliability, less than certain.
So it's like potentially unreliable.
Yeah.
But the text still includes it.
Exactly. And that's where it gets really interesting. It's like even if the specific wording of this hadith is debated, the core idea, the symbolism of a force for justice rising from Khorasan, it's still incredibly powerful.
I see. It's more about the idea, the big picture, than the specific details.
Right.
So the text then goes on to interpret this whole prophecy, right? And it ties it to this specific time, a time when there's a lot of darkness, injustice, when truth is being suppressed.
It's painting this picture of a world out of balance, a world where the forces of good they're being pushed down, silenced.
It's a bit bleak, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but this idea of things getting worse before they get better, it's a very powerful one. It pops up across so many different cultures, traditions. It speaks to this, I don't know, maybe it's this human need to believe that even in the darkest times, some force for good will eventually emerge.
You're right. It's like a universal story, right? Well, the hero always arrives when things are at their worst.
Exactly.
Okay, but then the text gets really thought-provoking. It starts asking these questions like, will this change, this big change in the world, will it come through faith, through knowledge, or will it take actual physical force? Swords!
What kind of army will this be? It's really pushing us to think about the nature of power, the nature of change.
Is it about winning hearts and minds, or is it about, winning battles on the battlefield?
And I think by presenting those two sides, faith and knowledge versus swords, the text is doing something really interesting. It's making us think beyond a simple, like, militaristic interpretation. It's saying maybe, just maybe, the true strength of this army, of this movement, lies in its intellectual and spiritual power.
So it's not just about being physically strong. It's about being, like, morally and intellectually strong as well.
Exactly.
And here's where it gets really relevant, I guess. The text says that we are, like, right now we are living in a time that's similar to this prophesied era of, darkness and injustice.
It draws a direct parallel.
Yeah. It even gives the example of Palestine, right, as a place where oppression is happening. And it also talks about, like, the division within the Muslim community, within the Ummah.
So it's taking this ancient prophecy and saying, hey, look around, this is happening now.
But isn't that a bit risky? Like, isn't it easy to kind of, like, look for things that fit your pre-existing beliefs?
Oh, absolutely. And that's where critical thinking comes in. We always have to be aware of our own biases, right? But I think what's interesting here is that the text is acknowledging that we're living in a complex world with complex problems. It's not giving us easy answers.
Okay, so let's talk about this army itself. Yeah. Right? Like, how is it described? Because it's not your typical army, is it?
No, not at all.
Like, it's not just a bunch of guys with weapons, right?
No, it's described as being made up of individuals who are deeply devoted to truth. Their defining characteristics are things like patience, unity, knowledge, and faith.
So it's more about their internal qualities, their character.
Exactly. The text is suggesting that true strength comes from within, that real lasting change starts with the individual.
It's like, you can't impose justice on the world if you don't have it within yourself first.
Right. And the focus on unity, especially when you consider the state of the Ummah, it's really interesting. It's like it's highlighting the need for people to come together, to work together, to have a shared purpose.
And how does this army actually fight? Like, what are their methods?
Well, according to the text, they fight through their character, through their knowledge. They raise their voices against injustice.
So it's more like a battle of ideas.
In a way, yes. The text seems to be suggesting that moral and intellectual superiority, they can be more powerful weapons than any physical weapon.
That's pretty deep, man.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we want to, like, connect this to our own lives, what's the takeaway here?
Well, the text is very clear about that. It says that if we want to, be a part of this movement, if we want to embody the spirit of Khorasan, we need to start with ourselves.
Like a personal transformation.
Exactly. We need to engage with the Quran and the Sunnah. We need to strengthen the bonds of unity within our own communities. We need to constantly seek knowledge. We need to prepare ourselves spiritually, intellectually, socially.
It's like, be the change you want to see in the world, right?
Yeah, very much so. It's a call to action, but it's an inward call first.
And then there's this line, this really powerful line, Kir Eish line, ye not sheep, the traveler on the path of truth is...
Steadfast.
Steadfast.
Yeah. Like unwavering, resilient. Committed to the journey, no matter how difficult it gets.
So it's not going to be easy, is it?
Probably not, but that's where faith and perseverance come in.
Okay, so what are we supposed to do? Like, what's the next step?
The text tells us to strive for excellence in everything we do, to keep learning, to deepen our faith, to be ready.
To be ready for what, exactly?
For this time, for this era of change. It's a responsibility, both individual and collective.
So it's like we need to prepare ourselves and we need to work together to create a better future.
Precisely.
And the text ends on a hopeful note, right? It says that the time for this army, for this movement, it will come.
Yes, it does. And it concludes with a prayer for Beit al-Muqaddas, for Jerusalem to be a place of freedom.
Jerusalem, that's significant, isn't it?
Hugely. It's a city that holds so much meaning for so many people. And by including it in this prayer, the text is connecting this very specific prophecy to a much broader yearning for justice, for liberation.
Wow. So just to recap, we've talked about the historical and spiritual significance of Khorasan, this like cradle of Islamic civilization. We've explored this prophecy of an army of people dedicated to truth and justice, not just through military might, but through their character, their knowledge, their unity.
And we've looked at how this prophecy is being interpreted in the text as a call to action for both individuals and the community as a whole.
Right. It's about looking inwards, transforming ourselves, and then working together to create a more just and balanced world.
And for you, the listener, I think the real question is, where do you fit into this? How can you embody these qualities of steadfastness, of knowledge, of unity, of speaking out against injustice?
It's about thinking about your own path, right? And how your individual choices, your actions, they can contribute to something much bigger than yourself. It's a lot to think about. It's pretty inspiring, actually.
It is.
Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive. It's been a journey.
It has.